Hey there, Nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back with another episode of Way of the Underhive. This is a series that's dedicated to brand new players of Necromunda, so if you're brand new to the game and you're trying to pick out what kind of gang you want to create for your very first Necromunda campaign, this is the series for you. In this series, we'll be going through each of the different gangs associated with the game right now, and we'll talk about their strengths or weaknesses, we'll talk about their individual fighters, how best to use them and equip them, and at the same time give you some ideas for some starting rosters that you can use in your very first campaign of Necromunda. So that being said, let's get this video on a roll. Alright, first of all, let's talk about the strengths of playing a House Cawdor gang. So first of all, they are the cheapest fighters for any house gang, which basically means more often than not, you will be outnumbering your opponents almost all the time. At the same time, this gang has the most access to template weapons of any gang in the system. So what if Cawdors have horrible ballistic skill? The templates solve that problem. The templates automatically hit, and that's how you can get it around the fact that Cawdor fighters have horrible ballistic skill. And it also helps that almost every single member of this gang can use this. Plus, now with the new Book of Faith that came out, we now have House of Faith book that came out, we now have access to Redemptionists as well as Articles of Faith game mechanic for this gang, which is a much needed added punch to a Cawdor gang, especially with Articles of Faith can be very, very entertaining, very fun, and very effective for your builds, as well as the Redemptionists that you can take with this gang. Now let's go talk about the gang's weaknesses. There's a reason why your gang relies on large numbers, and that's because your individual fighters are not very good. Their skills are also abysmal as well, and at the same time, this gang can be kind of pricey. Unless you're into proxying or using heavy conversions for your gang, this can be one of the most expensive gangs to field in terms of money, not because you're just buying box sets for Redemptionists as well as Cawdor, but also buying accessory weapon packs from Forge World, for example, in order to kit out your gang appropriately. So do go with that in mind when you decide to play a House Cawdor gang. So now that we got the strengths and weaknesses out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the individual fighters. Now, when it comes to you guys' individual fighters, there's actually quite a bit of variety in a House Cawdor gang, and that's because you have access to Redemptionists as well. So first of all, let's go and talk about your first leader, which is your standard Cawdor Wardkeeper. He's your leader of your gang. He costs you 100 credits. He's also got a 5-inch movement. He's got 3+ weapon skill, 4+ ballistic skill, 3 strength, 3 toughness, 2 wounds, 4+ for his initiative, 2 attacks. He has 4+ for leadership, 6+ for cool, 5+ for willpower, and 6+ for intelligence. Now, the reason why I do want to talk about this guy first is because he is your standard law-abiding leader for your gang. When you make a House Cawdor gang, you're actually kind of spoiled for choices. You can either choose normal House Cawdor gang members, or you could choose Redemptionists, which means that your gang members could become an outlaw gang, or you could have a combination of both. So it's kind of important to talk about the differences between them. Now, when it comes to your guys' Wordkeeper, basically the best way to run this character is either run this character as either a close combat fighter or as a true leadership support character. Personally, I feel that leadership support is the best to use on this guy just because the sheer number of fighters that you will have on the battlefield, and using those leadership skills are really going to help you take advantage of having those larger numbers against your opponents. So I tend to try to go with this guy using a true leadership build for this guy as well. At the same time, when you create this guy, you will also need to choose your path of faith. There are 5 different paths that you can choose, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail when we actually talk about the different paths of faith that you can use for your game mechanics. Now, your second leader you can choose is what's called the Redemptor Priest. Now, this guy is a Redemptionist. Now, he's going to cost you 100 credits. He's got pretty much the same stats as the Wordkeeper. He's got a 5 movement, 3+ weapon skill, 4+ ballistic skill. He has 3 strength and toughness, 2 wounds, 4+ on initiative, 2 attacks, 5 leadership, 6 cool, 4 willpower, as well as 7 on intelligence. Now, your Redemptor Priest is very similar to your Cawdor Wordkeeper. Now, the difference between the two of them, however, it comes to their special rules. Now, for example, a Redemptionist is the fanatical version of a House Cawdor member. So while House Cawdor gang members represent the law-abiding members of House Cawdor, the Redemptionists represent the outlaw factions. These guys are kind of like your religious zealots and domestic terrorist type of characters, what they actually do. So because they're very similar, the major difference between them, though, is the way that you equip them. When it comes to your Redemptor Priests, more often than not, you want to make these guys more of a close combat monster by equipping them with really powerful close combat weapons rather than leadership support. Your Cawdor Wardkeeper is more geared towards activating large numbers of fighters and leading their fighters in combat, while the Redemptor Priest is the guy kind of taking it to your opponents and fighting close combat primarily. So because of that, it kind of depends on what kind of gaming style you want to use for your gang. If you want to be able to do more of mob attacks and activating larger fighters, you want to go with the Cawdor Wordkeeper. But if you want your leader to be a close combat killing machine, then you go with the Redemptor Priest on that. And that's where the major difference between the two of them is because of the equipment that both of them can take. So let's go and talk about your champion. So the first champion you can choose is called a Cawdor Firebrand. This is your traditional champion for your gang. This guy's a law-abiding member of the gang as well. He's got costing 90 credits. He's got 5 movement, 4+ weapon skill, 3+ ballistic skill. He has 3 for strength as well as toughness, 2 wounds, 4 initiative, 2 attacks. He's got 5+ for leadership, 6+ for cool, 7+ for willpower, as well as 6+ for intelligence. So let's go and talk about this guy a little bit more in detail. So when it comes to your Firebrand, you have this special rule called the Righteous Warrior special rule, which basically makes them good for threshold tests for Articles of Faith, which basically means that you can get more faith dice for your gang, so that way you can use it for your acts of faith later on for your the different Articles of Faith they can use. And we'll talk about that game mechanic a little bit more in detail here in a second. So if you want to use that game mechanic of the acts of faith, then you probably want to get this guy because he kind of helps you get those faith dice you need in order to create those. At the same time, besides that, this guy is primarily being used as a heavy weapon shooter. And the reason why is because they have a lower ballistic skill, so that means they can get their shots up more often than not. The main weapon you want to use for this guy is your heavy crossbow for this guy, because you have your frag hit, you have your frag blast from the blast template from this thing. You also got your crack rounds you can use as well, so it's very, very deadly. And heavy crossbows are very, very powerful for a Cawdor gang. In fact, if you ever see any Cawdor gang that's out there, more often than not, they basically have 2 of these heavy crossbows that they can use. Now, the second champion type you have is what's called a Redemptionist Deacon. This is a Redemptionist champion. He costs 90 credits. He's got 5 movement, 4+ weapon skill, 3+ ballistic skill. This fighter also has 3 strength, 3 toughness, 2 wounds, 4 initiative. They have 2 attacks as base. They got 6+ for leadership as well as cool, 5+ for willpower, as well as 7+ for intelligence as well. Now this guy is also, once again, your outlaw variant that you can use for your guys' champions as well. Now when it comes to Redemptionist Deacon, this guy is your close combat, heavy assault monster. You want to kit this guy out with excellent assault weapons and watch him tear people apart. Things like fire pikes, flamers, really powerful close combat weapons, eviscerators, which is a combination of chain sword as well as a flamer, makes them really, really cool. Plus they have this special rule attached to them called Fanatical Fervor, which means they double their attacks, but they suffer -1 to hit. Now with a 4-up weapon skill, that drops to a 5-up weapon skill, and that may be insane to use that ability, but this is why you want to use it. And the reason why is because you do have access to piety skills, and when you use the different skills from piety, this kind of helps solve that -1 to hit, because you have a special rule called Devotional Frenzy, which basically means that once per turn, your weapon skill, cool, leadership, and willpower get an additional D3 to that value. So that will mitigate that -1 to hit. Now he does take the 1 damage to hit with no saves, but this guy is like your suicide, charge in and really kill people. And this guy is going to be really good for really taking on your opponents and causing all kinds of harm. So like I said, this guy is more of your close combat assault type of champion you can use. Alright, so let's talk about the gangers for your for the House Cawdor. So the first one is your Cawdor Brother. This is the law-abiding member that you have for the gang. He costs 45 credits, very cheap. He's got 5 movement, 4+ weapon skill and ballistic skill, 3 toughness and strength, 1 wound, 4+ initiative, 1 attack, and he's got 7 across the board for leadership, cool, willpower, as well as intelligence. So like I said before, the stats for this guy is not all that impressive, but the reason why you want your Cawdor Brothers is because they're very cheap, yet they're pretty effective. They can do things, most things, pretty average. Nothing to write home about. It all depends how you count these guys. You could use them for close combat, you can use them for shooting. They can pretty much do things equally well because their stats are so average. Now, the real reason you want to get this guy is because they have a special rule called Devout Masses, which means that no matter what scenario you're playing, you get +1 ganger in your starting roster for that scenario no matter what, which is really, really useful because having more fighters than your opponent is a huge boon to have on the battlefield. And that's the reason why you take Cawdor Brethren. You're not taking them because they're excellent combat or shooting abilities, you're bringing them because you can bring a lot of them is what you can do for your battlefields. So if you want to outnumber your opponent, Cawdor Brethren will not do you any wrong. Now, you also have the Redemptionist version, which is called a Redemptionist Brethren. This is your gangers for your Redemptionist build. They cost 50 credits. They have 5 movement, 4+ for weapon skill and ballistic skill, 3 strength and toughness, 1 wound, 4 initiative, 1 attack. They got 8+ for leadership, 6+ for cool, 6+ for willpower, as well as 9+ for your intelligence as well. So, you know, they're a little bit pricier, and some of their stats are not as good as the Cawdor Brethren, but they fulfill the same role. They can be either kit out for close combat or for shooting. And the main reason why you would want to take Redemptionist Brethren is not because of their stats, but because of the different equipment they have access to as well. These guys can get access to the specifically Redemptionist weapons, things like fire pikes. You could also clip them with chain axes, with exterminators, eviscerators. You could use their flaming templates. So that's the main reason why you take these guys. You're not taking them because of their stats. You're taking them because of the type of equipment they can bring, which could be really powerful in close assault type situations. So now let's move on to your juvies. So for the House Cawdor guys, you have two choices. The first one's called a Bone Picker. This is your typical House Juvie. This guy costs 20 credits. Very, very cheap. They got 6 movement, 5+ for weapon skill and ballistic skill, 3 for strength and toughness, 1 wound. They got 3+ for initiative, 1 attack. They have 8 across the board for leadership, cool, and will, and they have a 9+ for intelligence. So let's talk about your juvies real quick. So your juvies, these guys are super cheap, super expendable, and easy to replace, and therefore you should equip them as such. Just give these guys a bare minimum for equipment, and these guys will burn bright and they will die young, because you're going to use these guys for suicide type missions. Now the reason why you want your bone pickers is because they also have a special rule called Devout Masses, which means that you get D3 Jews for each battle beyond the maximum number of juvies or max number of fighters you can bring for a scenario. So because of that, you want to bring bone pickers not because they're good, you bring them because you can bring a lot of them in a scenario. So for example, if you're playing in a situation where you have only a maximum of 10 fighters to a scenario, right off the bat you can bring additional D3 Jews on top of that and 1 additional Ganger as well. So that way you can outnumber your opponents on that one. And that's the reason why you want this, because House Cawdor owns the numbers game in terms of the number of fighters you can bring on the battlefield. Now, House of the Redemptionists also have their version of a juvie. That character is called a Zealot. That person costs 40 credits. They have 6 movement, +1 for their weapon skill, so they have weapon skill 4 up. They have 5 up for ballistic skill, 3 strength and toughness, 1 wound, 3+ for initiative, 1 attack. They have 8+ for leadership, 7+ for cool, 8+ for willpower, and 9+ for intelligence. So these guys are the Redemptionist version of the juvie. Now you might be wondering, okay, well, Commander Cheapskate, why would I take a Zealot over a Bone Picker, since Bone Pickers are almost half the cost? The reason why you want to take a Zealot is because they have better access to weapons and equipment. That's the reason why you want to do that. For example, these guys have access to Eviscerators. Eviscerators are basically giant 2-handed chain swords with a built-in flamethrower at the same time. So that's the main reason why you want to take these guys. They have better equipment. They can take Exterminators on their close combat weapons, which is basically a one-shot flaming attack. They can take Pyromantic Mantles for 45 credits, which means they can all their close combat attacks have blaze attached to them. That's the reason why you bring them. The only problem with Zealots, even though they have really good access to equipment, their problem is they're just as fragile as normal juvies, so it's kind of scary to do that. Back in the day when Necromunda first came out, the most popular build to do with your Zealot was to equip them with an Eviscerator, which is the giant chainsaw weapon, and have them run around and chop people up. That may not be so appropriate now just because of the number of shooting attacks that most gangs have, but if you really want to go with a risk-benefit, these guys are high risk, high reward. High risk in terms of point value, but high reward because when they get stuck in, they can really tear it up a lot. So now that we're done talking about your individual fighters, let's go ahead and talk about the Paths of Faith game mechanic. Now, we're going to talk about this game mechanic because when you start this game, you have to choose a path of faith, and there are 5 different paths that you can choose, and they're all pretty important to address considering what you get when you first start off. Now, basically what these paths of faith mechanics is happening is you generate what's called faith dice, and with these faith dice, you could use them in order to create miracles, quote unquote, to happen on the battlefield. They give you different buffs and debuffs and different effects by using these faith dice. It's a very interesting and fun game mechanic that you can use in order to play them. So let's talk about the different paths real fast. Basically, you have 4 main paths you can choose from. You have the Path of Faithful. Path of Faithful is more concentrated on helping buff your fighters with additional abilities to debuff your enemies and to earn more faith dice so that way you can bring more miracles onto the table. It's actually a really good starting path to take if you're brand new to Necromunda. It's going to help you out the most in my opinion. The second path is called the Path of the Fanatic, and what this does is it helps you with your fighters' movements as well as combat abilities, so that way they can get stuck in closer and also fight better in close combat. The third path is called the Path of the Doom. Now this one is basically you generate buffs for your gang and abilities when you lose fighters. So the more fighters you lose, the better off you are getting these abilities off. This one is kind of interesting because if you're playing a normal House Cawdor gang with not many Redemptionists, or because you have so many cheap fighters who are going to be doing a lot of dying, this could really help you out and get some abilities off. Then you have the opposite path called the Path of the Redeemer, and basically it generates buffs and abilities for your gang when your enemy loses fighters. So like, for example, you could take this if you want to have a more Redemptionist heavy gang with have more reliable weapons and more powerful equipment to use to kill enemies, in which case you probably want to do the Path of the Redeemer because that would help you out the most. Now you have a 5th path, and it's called the Path of whatever you want to call it. And this is basically you make your own faith, and what you do with that is by you choose 4 different miracles from any of the paths above, and you can create your own custom one as well. So the only difference though is that with your homemade path, you don't get some of the buffs as the other 4 paths do, but it offers you more variety. It makes it more customized for you. And of course, when you make your very first gang, you're going to choose which path that you want to take. For me personally, I think Path of the Faithful will be really good for beginning players to Necromunda. So if you want to take a path for the very first time, I'd recommend that one. I like the Path of the Doom just because, when you lose fighters and you're sticking to your opponents, it's just more fun that way. But it's entirely up to you how you want to build out your gang. Alright, so now that we're done talking about the game mechanics and the fighters, let's talk about some of the starting gangs you can use. Now, I will tell you this now, there will not be any pure Redemptionist gang lists in this video. And the reason why is because I plan on making a video just focusing on Redemptionists by themselves to make it all Redemptionist gang later on, right? So you're not going to see any pure Redemptionist gang builds in this list. So the very first list I'm going to present to you guys what I call the Cheapskate list. The Cheapskate list basically costs one thing. You need one box of Cawdor fighters. And it's going to cost you 1,000 credits in order to fill this gang. Now this one is the number of fighters is the name of the gang with this build. You'll be using all 10 fighters from the box set, and then more often than not, it's going to actually automatically have you outnumber your opponents. You have lots of medium to long range shooting in this list, and your main killer will be the gang's heavy crossbow. You will use your Wordkeeper's Overseer ability in order to fire the crossbow twice, and so you can get a suspension for your crossbow Firebrand, and you can more reliably hit targets at longer distances. Now this gang consists of 2 fire teams. You have a support element as well as assault element. Your support fire team will consist of your Wordkeeper as well as Firebrand number 1 as well as Brother number 5 and Brother number 6. Your assault fire team will consist of Firebrand number 2, Brother number 1, 2, 3, and 4 as well as a Jew for your bone picker. So let's go and talk about exactly what your guys will be carrying. For your Wordkeeper, he's going to cost you 130 credits. You're equipping this guy pretty basically. He's got an axe, a stub gun with mesh armor, as well as the Overseer ability. This guy's not going to be doing much fighting. What he's really going to be doing is leading and being attached to Firebrand number 1, so that way the Firebrand number 1 could fire twice with that heavy crossbow. Firebrand number 1 is going to cost you 225 credits. He's got a heavy crossbow with flak armor as well as the parry combat ability, so that way you can do long distance shooting and still be a little bit more survivable in close combat. Firebrand number 2 is going to cost you 210 credits. This fighter is going to be armed with an auto gun combo weapon, which is an auto gun as well as a flamer attached to it as well. He's got flak armor as well as a parry special ability skill, so that way he's a little bit more survival in close combat as well. Now, Brethren 1 and 2 will cost you 85 credits apiece. These guys will be armed with blunderbuss pole arms, so that way they can use that template blast with his blunderbusses and kill enemies that way and still fight in close combat. Brethren number 3 and 4 will be armed with autogun pole arms for 65 credits apiece, so that way they can do some longer range shooting as well as be pretty good in close combat as well with their pole arms. Brethren 5 and 6 are purely made for medium to long range shooting. They're both going to cost you 55 credits apiece, and they're both armed with reclaimed autoguns. And then lastly, you have a bone picker, who's your Jew. It's going to cost you 25 credits, and he's armed with a stub gun. And that's pretty much making up the Cheapskate build for this one. Alright, the second build we're going to present here is what I call the standard build, and the reason why is because this is what most players are going to be starting off with. You have to purchase a box of Cawdor gang fighters and a box of Redemptionists, because you'll have both fighters in this gang. It's going to cost you 1,000 credits to fill this gang as well. And this is a pretty large gang as well. It consists of 10 fighters in this list as well. Now this build also utilizes templates with your blunderbusses, and it also has a more aggressive playstyle as well. And you still have excellent long range shooting with your support fire team, but your real killer in this one is assault element number 1. You have 2 assault elements in this gang. Assault element number 2 acts as your advanced scouting screen, absorbing most of your enemy shooting as well as your attention, so these guys are going forward to die. Now, like I said before, you have 3 fire teams in this list. You have 1 support fire team and 2 assault fire teams. Support fire team number 1 will consist of a Wordkeeper, Firebrand, as well as a Redemptionist Brethren. Assault fire team number 1 will consist of a Redemptionist Deacon and 3 Brethren, Brethrens 1, 2, and 3. And assault element number 2 will have 3 bone pickers, bone picker 1, 2, and 3 as well. So let's talk about how they're going to be equipped. For your Wordkeeper, he's going to cost you 130 credits, axe, stub gun, mesh armor, as well as Overseer. Once again, this guy is your leadership support character, and he's primarily going to be sticking around with your Firebrand. He's going to cost you 225 credits. He's got a heavy crossbow, flak armor, as well as the parry skill, so that way you can do some long range shooting with that crossbow. You also have a Redemptionist Deacon in this gang as well. Now he's going to cost you 200 credits. He's going to be armed with Eviscerator, so he's got a really powerful 2-headed chain sword with a flamer attached to it as well. He's got an incombustible halberd, so that way he doesn't worry about getting set on fire. He has Devotional Frenzy, so that way his close combat attacks are even deadlier as well. You also have a Redemptionist Brethren in this gang as well. He's going to cost you 115 credits. He's going to be armed with a grenade launcher as well as your gang specialist. Now the reason why we have this is because Brethren 1, 2, and 3 are going to be equipped exactly the same. All 3 are going to cost 85 credits apiece. They're all going to be carrying blunderbuss pole arms, so they get that blast template with their guns as well. At the same time, your 3 bone pickers are going to cost you 25 credits apiece. Bone picker 1, 2, and 3. All 3 guys are using kits to carry stub guns. So you're going to take your bone pickers, you're going to put them out forward to take shots and being assaulted by your opponent and keep your opponent busy, whereas your support team will do the long range shooting and your first assault team will then come in and flank, and that's pretty much how this works. And if you're worried about your bone pickers, don't be. These guys only cost 25 credits and you can always replace them if they should die. Now the third and final build I call the Major Moneybags build, because if I had a rival, that would be my rival's name. And the reason why that's called the Major Moneybags build is because this one is the most expensive to purchase for the gang. So you'll need 1 box of Cawdor, 1 box of Redemptionist, as well as a box of Forge World weapon packs for your gang. Now this is another large gang with 10 fighters inside of it as well, and it's got a good mix of Cawdor and Redemptionists. The only problem that is the most pricey of the builds in terms of money for you the player to spend money on to build this. So that's the problem with this one as well. Now this is another close quarters battle list with this gang, and it relies upon templates that offset the lower ballista skill for the fighters. And once again, this list consists of 3 fire teams. You have 1 support team and 2 assault teams. Fire support team number 1 consists of Firebrand number 1, Firebrand number 2, as well as a Redemptionist Brethren. Assault team number 1 consists of your Word Keeper, as well as Brother number 1 and 2, and your Assault Fire team number 2 consists of Zealot number 1, Zealot number 2, Bone Picker number 1, and Bone Picker number 2. Now your support team will be your main killers in this list, while Assault team 1 does most of the killing in close combat, and Assault team number 2 will be able to suppress as well as using their one-shot flamers, but mostly rely upon close combat in order to survive. So let's talk about your equipment for this one. Now your Word Keeper is going to cost you 150 points, and the reason why is because this guy's going to be armed with a Blunderbuss polearm. He's got flak armor as well as commanding presence. So while the rest of the Word Keepers are kind of sitting in the back, staying away, this guy's going up and personal, blasting people with that 10-place blast, has a polearm for close combat, and has commanding presence to activate more fighters. Firebrand number 1 is going to be equipped with a heavy crossbow. He's got flak armor as well as a parry skill. It's going to cost you 225 credits. And Firebrand number 2 is going to cost you 130 credits because this guy's going to be armed with a long rifle. He's got flak armor as well as the parry skill. So like I said before, Firebrand number 1 and 2 will be doing all your long range shooting. As well as your Redemptionist Brother, who costs you 115 credits. He's going to be armed with a grenade launcher and is also your gang specialist as well. Now for the rest of your gang, Brother number 1 and 2 will be equipped exactly the same. They both are packing Blunderbuss polearms and cost you 85 credits. They're going to use those template blasts in order to attack their opponents. They have polearms for close combat as well. Now Zealot number 1 and Zealot number 2 are both going to cost you 80 credits, and these Q guys are going to be armed with 2-handed axes, so that way they have good close combat ability, and they have an exterminator on those axes, so that way they can use a one-shot flamer to kill people with flaming blasts as well. So these guys are going to be sitting in forward, blasting people with fire, and then of course just mopping up whatever's left over with your hand axes. And then Bow Picker 1 and 2, they both cost 25 credits apiece. These guys will be the ones running around with stub guns and acting as bullet magnets for your opponent. So like I said before, very large gang, but it's also going to cost you the most amount in terms of money in order to fill this gang. Alright you guys, so there you have it. This is my introductory information for brand new players if you're planning on picking a House Cawdor starting roster. And when it comes to this gang, bring the pain and the flame to the Underhive. Get stuck in close, do a lot of shooting, set a lot of guys on fire, and just defeat your enemy with numbers. And this gang is a very fun game to play. It's always fun to play this game because they're interesting game mechanics. Plus, you're always outnumbering your enemies, which is all kinds of fun as well. And the reason why is because the Path of Faith is all you need for this gang. Get a good Path of Faith, send your fighters forward, and bring fire to the Underhive. Cawdor actually has a special place in my heart because this is the gang I first started off with when I first played Necromunda way back in the mid-90s when the game first came out. And I'm really, really happy that they actually have this gang. Really kitted out really well with Redemptionists as well as their Path of Faith game mechanic. So that's good for this one, you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest, greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this one, you guys. We'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.